This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
She's having a gap year. She got into Monash Design, but she's working in my office at the moment because get her off the couch. Right? Gap year? Gap year?
So is she going to spend any time travelling? Or?
Well, that's what we thought gap year was all about.
Yeah.
But no.
No, but she's working.
But now she's working, so she didn't travel, she didn't do anything. She had she just sitting around, so that's not good enough. So she, I see her 24/7 now.
Oh dear.
Keep checking up on her at work. Oh, she's not in my area, she's in the admin area.
Oh.
What are you doing? Well, leave me alone, I'm doing all this. She's good, she's a smart kid.
Aww.
They're all good.
Alright, maybe we'll make a start for today.
Go for it, go for it.
Alright everyone, we're going to get started for today. I know that this is our last week at university. Is this anyone's last week at uni ever? Like, is anyone graduating? Sorry?
I wish.
Oh yeah. Don't we all? Alright, today we have a guest lecturer here with us, Bruce Doyle. He's going to talk to us about essential services within a building. He'll kind of explain to us why it's important for us to know it in our field of real estate management and the importance of it. Alright, everyone who's still talking, could we just, respect the people in front here? And, if it's about your assignment, I'm going to stay back a bit later on to address that because I know that lots of people have questions about it. I'll spend the last 15 minutes of today's lecture to talk about the exam as well and do a bit of a review to put your minds to ease, all right? But for now, Bruce is going to talk us through essential services. Thank you, Bruce.
First, how many of you aim to be in the property management world? This is a property management course, isn't it?
The role of property manager.
Yeah, if you're going to finish here and you're going to go and work as a property manager, like a commercial property manager. One, all right.
But it's commercial.
Yeah, commercial. Residential is horrible. We'll talk about why residential is horrible, and it's all to do with people. I'm the National Compliance Manager for a company called AESC, Australian Essential Services Compliance. The name's a bit out of date because it's no longer called Essential Services because that's to do with gas and electricity and all those sort of things. Where's the clicker? Just do the arrows. Yep. We'll do it. Essential safety measures. It's a really exciting topic. It's probably the most boring topic you'll get this year until you actually get employed as a property manager, and it will be your number one topic. Believe me, if you want to earn money in property management in working for some of the big firms, the first thing they'll ask you at every meeting is, how's your stats on your ESM? Essential safety measures. Slightly different terms around the country, but we'll cover that. Anybody gather, like, essential safety measures? A few drastic fires, but we'll talk about these as time goes on. Just trying to get some drama into this whole presentation. These are all fires in Melbourne, lovely Melbourne, with very bad regulation, building regulation going on. And this is one of my scariest photos that I've got on my file. We'll talk about this in due course. We'll come backwards and forwards and explain what's the problem with this and how it actually got to this stage. If anybody doesn't understand what this is a warehouse full of plastics. All right, and this is the owner or owner's rep. I wouldn't even stand in there, but anyway, we'll get to that. Essential safety measures have been around for just a fairly long time. All right? Roman times, certain guy for fiddle, Rome burnt down. The design of Rome and ongoing Roman Empire changed at that moment where they decided to do a thing called fire safety installations and fire safety measures by separating buildings so the fire couldn't spread through the city anymore. So it was contained to an area. There were a lot of fires, but they were contained to buildings. There's always lots of fires everywhere in the world. All right, stuffed up the slides, but there's one behind that, which is the Great Fire of London. Again, another fire, but they didn't listen to the Romans. Once the Romans left England, they kept building, kept building. They essentially built this huge community out of wooden structures. There was one fire in a bakery, whipped through London. Again, and as we learned with everything about essential safety measures, there was a few deaths. Once there's deaths, they changed the actual design precedence of buildings and fire separation. So if you live in a terrace house, or if you live in an apartment block greater than 2 stories, you'll have fire separation everywhere around you that you won't even know about. Okay? And that's to do with the fact that if your unit catches fire, your house catches fire, it won't spread. So what are they? We've missed a slide. Essential safety measures are the elements of fire safety designed into a building. So I've talked about fire separation. This room here is an auditorium. There's a substantial amount of fire separation in this building. And there's also fire protection. We've got smoke detectors, there's some in the ceiling line, there's some low, we've got some thermal detectors. So they're in the detection and warning system. Suppression systems, you don't have much in here, it's an auditorium, it's a funny little world. But we'll get to that. So no sprinkler sets, no hydrants. There'll be a hose rule out there. Egress measure, that's pretty straightforward. Green lights, and that's to do with paths of travel, doors, the way they all open. How do I release these ones? Doesn't matter. These doors are held open by a fire panel, by the way. So if you can release them, they're supposed to open on a fire or they'll be released on a fire. It's all work to do with egress. Buildings are designed for 3 things. To get you out, to get a brigade in, and not burn the place next door down. That's the principles of fire, essential safety measures, to get you out. So with all these different things, mechanical systems is to do with stair pressurisation and big fans to suck the air out or to pressurise the areas. You'll get that in apartment buildings where you go to the stairs. They're big concrete stairs, there's nothing in it apart from steel and concrete usually, and there'll be a big whopping fan at the top to pressurise it. So if you open the door, air will come out, smoke won't go in. It's a safety area. Signage, pretty inert. Some exit signage and some do not obstruct, do not let go, keep this area clear, all those sort of things. It's things that, if it works all together, you'll be able to get out of the place. Specialised systems, they're to do with high design places like data centres and high-end restaurants or big industrial cooking and manufacturing areas. So they're a bit different. They're to do to suppress the fire as soon as possible. And the last one is essential safety measure is human behaviour. We won't talk about human behaviour much because it's my least favourite topic. You can maintain a building, you can make sure all this works and buildings are designed by this. You can't control this at all, to a degree. People do weird things under stress. We won't go there. Go back. All right. Why do we need to worry about it? Let's go. Let's just march on the way it's set up. Essential safety measures of maintaining a building is like maintaining a car. If you maintain it, the car will last forever, longer and longer and longer. Buildings are designed for a life cycle. They are designed for quite a long time. If you maintain the building and all those separate elements in the building that we had up before, the chances and probability of there being a failure is very, very low. So when you've got a building and it's been built and the surveyor hands over an occupancy permit which says that it's safe to occupy in the sense that there's enough water and there's electricity and the sewage works, that you have to actually from there on, in all states of Australia, maintain it to specific standards and codes to ensure that the fire safety is maintained for the life of the building. So if you're in a property management world and your main component is risk, you've got budgeting, you've got everything else, and there's a big risk management over you, your job is to lessen or to eliminate the probability of failure. To do that, the way that our society works and most Western world societies is by law. So we've got a Building Act. In Victoria, 1993 Building Act. We've got a building regulation. It's just been redone, so it's 2018. The regulation explains how to fulfil the requirements of the Act. Underneath the building regulations, we've got this thing called the BCA and the NCC, which is the Building Code of Australia and the National Construction Code. If you have any interest in the building world, go to www.abcb.gov.au and download the building codes. Have a look. At least be familiar with that website. It's a government website and they release these building codes to the general public and to the construction industry and to the maintenance people, so everybody is on the same playing field of knowing what they're supposed to do. If I go to one of your buildings and say there's non-compliant hardware to D2.21, so you can go into the building code and get a better understanding. Okay, that's the building code. The building code is a national code across our country, and bits of it are even adopted in New Zealand. It's one code for the whole lot. That's it. There's variations. If you're in cyclones, you've got to put more screws in your roof, and if you're in Hobart, you've got a bit more insulation. There's the tweaking of it, but in general, it's one construction code. Underneath that, you've got Australian standards. Australian standards are proven standards and tested systems to make sure that each component works, or the maintenance component is being tested and that lessens the probability of failure over the top. And the bottom, we've got state regulators. In Victoria, it's called the VBA, Victorian Building Authority. They're the ones who govern what's going on and they help councils and they bid practice notes. In the world of cladding, where we started in those photos, is everybody aware of the cladding issue in Melbourne or Australia or the world? All right. The cladding issue started up in the building regulations area, where the building regulations were not enforced strong enough and the builders got away with a few tweaks. They didn't abide by the Australian standards and the state regulators let it happen. It's complete stuff up. Okay? The problem is, you may have noted a couple of months ago when the state government went to the federal government and said, can we have a lot of money to fix all our cladding? And the federal government said no. The federal government gives them the building code. It's the regulators to fulfil that building code. They didn't do their job. Okay? And there was lots of issues with the way surveyors did work and fire engineers and collusion and property developments putting pressure on it and product designers and specifiers fibbing and all the rest of it. The whole thing's a mess because they didn't follow it through. Okay? When this works properly, it works brilliantly. Got some of the safest buildings in Australia. But you should also note there's been no deaths in cladding in Australia at all. And there's been no deaths of construction issues like some of the towers up in Sydney. There is enough regulation, there is enough fire safety in those buildings that the people are protected. Even if the whole outside of the building caught fire, there was enough fire safety within that building to get people out. So there was enough suppression system, detection system, fire separation, all the rest of it. But it doesn't always work, and we'll have a few examples of that, really, really sad examples. All right, so this is the Act, and that's the law. Regulations define the fines and how to do it, and down we go. People will say Australian standards are not a law, but they really are, because the tiers of responsibility are backed up by the regulations, hence the Act, hence fines. The whole thing about standards comes a lot when you're talking about money, because some of them are quite difficult to fulfil, and contractors want to cut back. Okay, each state and territory has defined regs and legislation designed to ensure the safety of occupants throughout the life of the building. Okay, then we talk about ULOT. The responsible entity is the owner and the occupier. The owner, at all times, is responsible for every building they own. So it might be a super fund, it might be a private developer, it might be a private home fund or a superannuation fund, your own personal fund. You might have invested in a commercial property, put your super into it. You're responsible. So how do you know what the occupier is doing? You put steps in place to make sure you're right. In the law of what you guys are being qualified for is property management. Property management works under the law of agency. So you're an agent to the owner. So when you step in as an agent to the owner, you're representing the owner. So always be mindful that what you do, you're representing the owner. So if you stuff up, you're stuffing up on behalf of the owner. If you don't ask the right questions and you don't do your own due diligence, you're the responsible entity. So you've got to keep that in mind, especially when you start making decisions and you're not getting the right advice. you've got to be very, very careful because the owner, at the end of the day, is responsible. You're the agent of the owner, and down it goes. I act as an agent to the agent, so it goes by proxy all the way through. ESMs. It's not complicated at all. I think you get these slides, and if you can understand this slide within about a month, I'll go here. This slide is basically that structure we talked about before, the Act, the regulations, the building code, and what's required and who's responsible. This is per state. We're not a unified nation. We are state-based and territory-based regulators. So I live in the world of regulation. I sort of support that and help that through and bend it a bit now and then, but I also interpret it for the owners and for the agents and all the property managers and everybody else. So we've got all the different states down the side, different acts, regs, and what they're called, because essential safety measures have different names, and if you've got a national portfolio, you've got to be able to speak all the different languages all at once. Some of the annual certifications, so a certificate to promise that you're doing the right thing, in New South Wales has to go to council, has to go to the fire brigade. If you don't submit it on that day, you get fined. Whack. Big fines. And they go escalate up. It's very serious. In Victoria, you've got to have it, make it available. South Australia, depending on the building, you've got to get the council, you've got to have it available. Tassie, forgotten about it. They actually withdrew the annual certification because it wasn't working. So they've gone another way. They've actually making sure you know what you're doing. Queensland, occupier statement, slightly different. It's not the owner, it's the occupier has to sign off that everything works. So we've got this variation, you've got to be aware of it. You don't need to know it, but you need to know somebody who does. That's what I always say. It's like going to a GP. He may not know every disease in the world, but he knows where to look it up. Okay? Keep that in the back of your brains. Building regulations in 2018. So things do change. What I might do is go back a bit. We're going to slip right into regulation land. All right, I get to draw, so I like drawing. I'm going to expand on the design principles of all this. Sorry, bring it down. When I was talking about what goes into a building, the things that it's time to get you out. The bigger the building, the more time you need, so you need more of these items. And this is really well described in the building code. So if we've got the building code of Australia. You've got a developer, he's got a big bucket of money, and he wants to develop something. Okay, so rise in story. EY, sorry. Height. Class. Classification, use, and size. Rise in story means how many levels it goes up. Height. You could have, it could be quite low, could be only about 3 levels up, it could be huge and fat and wide like a retirement village. Classification. Every building has a separate classification. We run in Australia a classification from 1 to 10. 1 being a domestic dwelling, freestanding dwelling, or that one with one party wall. That's it, 1 family per unit. As you put more, it goes up to class 2. Class 2 has a bit more fire separation. So you might be a block of 4, you might be a block of 4 units. We're going to start putting some fire separation. So if there's a fire down here, it's not going to affect anything else. If there's a fire here and there's fire separation, it gives you time to get out. So if we look at time over distance, it all starts making sense. Who lives in a high-rise tower? Anybody live in a high-rise? Somebody will be. Come on. Anybody live in a high-rise development? A couple of years ago, there will be. A couple of years ago, I set a bit of a project to understand how your building operates and to get into the fire stair and follow it down the fire stair until you got out. I didn't quite comprehend that some of the kids in the class lived on about 40, level 72 or something it was. So they went down 72 flights of stairs, doubled by 2 because there's 2 per landing, so 140 flights of stairs to get out of the building. They were a tad sore the next day. But that's worked out by the time of distance. Okay. Use of a building. You've got classification, but there's also a use. A retail shop can also be a brothel. A retail shop can be a doctor's surgery. A retail shop can be a dentist. So there's different characteristics of all those sites and that affect the use or affect the character of the site. There's also the use, like classification for use: residential, multi-residential, class 3, boarding house, can also be prisons. Very different principles. Very, very different. All right? And size. This sort of covers off areas like you've got huge warehouses out of Derrimut or Turrigonina or Campbellfield. The size will denote some other fire safety measures. Put it in pictorial. Let's design something. All right, we're doing a multi-storey tower. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 level little block. We're going to mix it up. We've got retail. That's class 6. We've got some commercial. And then say we've got a hotel above. And then we've got some plant and equipment, air conditioning, lifts, all the rest of it. Okay. So we've got a mishmash of things here. There's a hotel, there's commercial, and there's retail. Every one of these has a different characteristics as when you're in the building. I won't get a response. So retail, you've got a couple of people who know the site, and you've got a lot of visitors who come in, they go out. Pretty straightforward. Commercial, everybody's fairly familiar with the building. You might have a few guests, you might have a few contractors, but on the average, you're pretty familiar with the building. Hotel, we've got a problem. What's the big problem between hotels and the rest of these, what we're talking about here? Hotels are very different, well, hopefully very different to commercial areas and retail areas. The main difference being, or many of the differences being, what do you do in a hotel? Don't tell me all the answers, but the major one. Sleep. All right. We call it the Z factor. Sleep. Anywhere where you sleep, there's a hell of a lot of all this. But, as we tried to suggest, other things happen in hotels. You've got to remember, if you're in a hotel, you may not speak the language of the country you're in, you may be completely disorientated, you may be high as a kite, you may be drunk as a skunk, you may be doing something you don't want anybody else to know about, you may be jet lag, you might have everything, and you may, over the top of it, you may have a disability, like an impairment, or you may be just completely and utterly unfit. And you're on the 7th level, and you've got to get down. The worst case scenario that I've come across, if we ignore all these, and there's a few around these days, and they're changing the lengths before it. We've got a bit of retail at the bottom, we've got office, we've got office, we've got office. Oh, we've got 9B, classic. And we've got office, we've got office. We've got 9B, which in my world is a few different things. It can be a lecture theatre, this is 9B. It can be a school, the greater environment around us is 9B. It also can be a childcare centre. And office people love putting childcare centres in buildings because it keeps all their workers happy. Has anybody got kids here? Yeah, kids? Anybody got nephews and nieces? You ever tried to put their shoes on? Imagine if you've got 50 kids and there's a fire and you need to get out. Like putting shoes on a caterpillar and every one of them screaming and yelling. There's lots of bells and whistles, all the rest of it. It's an absolute panic station. Time. So if you've got childcare, you need to have a hell of a lot of fire separation in that building to get enough time to get them out. And then there's other human behaviour issues. If you've got mum working down here and we've got a fire stair, human behaviour time, there's a fire, straight up the fire stair. What's coming down the fire stair? Everybody else. What else is going up the fire stair? Fire brigade. It's a calamity. They're in the process of re-looking at all this. There are a few around Melbourne, childcare and high-rise. It's a bit of a disaster because they haven't quite worked the time principles out. Okay? So, when you've got this multi-storey building, we'll get rid of the child because that's just a confusing thing. We've got a hotel. Fire separation, fire separation, fire separation, fire separation, fire separation, fire separation, fire separation. Every single component is fire separated. You open up a cupboard and it'll be all sealed. No smoke will get through, theoretically. Everything is really, really tight. It's supposed to be really, really tight. Smoke migrates through buildings very quickly. The fire stair, you'll have a big fan up the top, pushing air in. Open up the door, the pressure will actually hold the door open a bit. It will, it's supposed to close, because the door opens inwards to a fire stair, it will close in, and that stops smoke coming through. This is how it's supposed to operate. If all these things work, your detection system goes off, okay, the detection system's not going to put the fire out. The fire builds up, suppression system controls it a bit, heaps of smoke generated, we've got foam and everything on fire, or acrid foam, it's building up. The mechanical system kicks in once the fire panel goes off, cascades up and down the building. It's all very clever how it works. Doors open, doors close, fire curtains come down, you name it. Hundreds of different things happen in a fire mode. Not much about signage. Specialised systems might come in, everything happens. Fire brigade gets called, they turn up, they've got the hoses, they pour water on it, and everybody gets out. Usually works. Buildings in Australia, very, very safe. But doesn't always work. And the reason it doesn't always work is because of these damn humans. New South Wales are going through a legislation change at the moment because of a coroner's inquest. And as I tried to say at the beginning, in the Great Fire of London, death happened. If there was a fatality due to the cladding issues at La Crosse Fire back in 2014, the regulatory environment in Victoria and Australia would have changed almost instantaneously. They're still arguing about the cladding and trying to fix it. It's gone to court, it's done all the rest. We've got problems with all the regulatory, we've got all that, we're doing all this stuff, but it's going to be a really slow process because there wasn't a death. If you want to see how regulation changes, read the coroner's report for a young girl called Connie Zhang. It's called the Connie Zhang Inquest in New South Wales. Completely deplorable story. But this is what happens. All right, it's only about, I think, a 3 or 4 level building, a couple of buildings. Everything was built within like 50 millimetres of all the allowances for the code. So if you want to have a non-sprinklered building, you're allowed to go to 25 metres. So they built it to 24 metres, 990 mil. Say, example. If you don't want to have stair pressurisation, the way to do that is to have all these other things. So they designed around, they missed the whole, they worked around the intent of the building code because it's cheaper. Annual certification, we've talked about annual certification. They've got a fire portables technician, the guy who stamps the fire extinguishers, to sign off the whole building. He had no idea what he's doing. He just got pressured and paid off by the owner. Yeah, fairly good money. If you sign this, all good. So he did it. And yeah, the owner did the right thing, but was that guy competent? Big question. When the building was there was a couple of buildings, a residential little development. When it was finished, they closed over a little courtyard. So in effect, they made it an atrium building. They closed it all in. So they weren't freestanding buildings, they were one big building. Now, if you want to engineer out disasters, and this is what the building code does. So once there's a death, they engineer out the issue. In this case, it brought up a few problems with the design and the whole regulatory environment. But there was the one common factor, and I brought this up at the VBA, if you want to engineer it out, there was a common factor between all the 3 fires. They were all started by a tourist who smoked. So that's the clue. So no one can smoke or be a tourist in Australia, or any tourist can't smoke because it'll set fire. And literally, if you want to design it, that's what you have to do. So, La Crosse Fire, the Bankstown Fire, which is the Connie Zhang one, 01 down in Spencer Street, and a couple of others up in Queensland, all started with cigarettes, believe it or not. So, cigarette, on this one, there was a balcony, heaps of rubbish on the balcony, an air conditioner condenser, cigarette, put it out into a flower pot or into a cardboard or something like that, lots of wind. If you've ever been on a veranda on a huge residential, lots of wind, uplift. arced it up, set the conditioner alight, or the gases caught fire, or the plastics and everything went fire. The young guy who extinguished the cigarette was still in the unit, and he panicked. Of course, that black fire, he's left the door open in the patio, the fire's come in, so it's filling up with smoke. So what he's done is that I'll get out. The apartment also had 2 other girls studying. He chocked the door, so he chocked the door, left it open, he put a weight in front of it, which made a bigger draft, which made it thicker. It drew the air in. The girls came out of their bedroom, what's going on, and it was just black thick. They couldn't see a thing. So it fills up very, very quickly. The smoke develops really quickly. The only option they had at that time, because they couldn't find any doors or anything, was to go to the veranda. So they went to a ledge and they jumped. One passed away, one became a quadriplegic. So we've got 2 things. One was a bad incident, but eventually what was found out, the whole design of the place was inappropriate for the use. So what had happened, poor Connie, she started the inquest, realised that this whole structure, the regulation and everything didn't work. So they've changed it all. You have to be a competent contractor. You have to have a competent fire safety practitioner to sign off on buildings. Every surveyor has to get their work reviewed. There has to be umpteen different more inspections during the construction. The regulatory councils are much more strident to give the schedules out or behold the schedules, because in New South Wales you've got a schedule you have to maintain to. We'll see one later, and they have to manage it. Councils merged, lots went missing, and there's a lot of documents missing. So we go to submit a document, so well, we don't know what it is. So we've got to go back and re-engineer buildings. It's an absolute mess. And as I said, if La Crosse Fire actually had a death, things would be very different. But we do have stronger regulations. The regulations are backed off that New South Wales incident. Essentially what they've done is they've reduced, revoked and strengthened regulations down in Victoria. We have a thing called the VBA, Victoria Building Authority, and they give us practice notes. It's a good website, good to know. If you've got a pool, look it up, because they've got heaps of advice on pools.
I have a question for that pyramid of yours,
Yep.
It starts with the Act on top. Is that Commonwealth Act? Or?
No, that's State Act. There is a Commonwealth over the top.
And all these National Building Australia Code, is that based on Commonwealth?
Yep.
All right.
Yep. So the Commonwealth have an overall governing responsibility to provide a building code, and they have. There's also federal governments involved there because airports are federal, and you also have governance of independence, so that you can have embassies over the top of that. So it encompasses all those. So there is a bit of Crown land, and there's airports, and there's some other regulations mixed into it. But overall, we do have one governing, but it just provides guidance. Good question. The VBA give you a practice note of how to fulfil the regulations and how to go about it and break it all down, and they constantly maintain it. They put lots of spelling errors in it and they re-release it, and it goes on and on and on. So, back to where we were before. We've got a new building, size, height and classification, use, installation requirements and maintenance requirements. This is the world I live in. The most interesting part of this whole conundrum and the most expensive part of this whole conundrum. All these things won't work unless you maintain the building. And do you need to know every element of what's required to be maintained? Not necessarily so, but I tell you what, I've got a lot of super funds knocking on the door saying, can you give me a sheet, just a cheat sheet, on what my property managers should be looking for? We want to buy this huge estate down in Dandenong and we don't think it's right, can you give us some guidance? It's a $700 million thing and they're trying to ask, you know, are they doing the right thing? Because they know, they're smart, they know that it hasn't been maintained properly, they're going to be paying a fortune to get it up to speed. And it's super fund money, they don't want to waste it. So they withhold money and they, for the sales, 700 million, hold off 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, whatever they reckon, and then release it once they've proved the place is okay. So 3 years later. Okay, we talked about classifications. Here they are. Class 1A, single dwelling. Class 2, more than 2 occupancy units. Class 3, we talked about hotel. Residential part of detention centre, always a funny one. I always get amazed when I go to prisons that they've got a lot of exit signs in them. they get smashed like you wouldn't believe because they can't get out. It's a conundrum if they're design industry. Class 4, don't worry about it. Class 5 office building goes all the way through. And as you'll see, Class 9B, where we are, assembly building, secondary school, but including other parts of the other class and all the rest of it, including a trade workshop and labs. It's a really mixy one. They're going to try and split that up because it doesn't work. Okay, type of construction. There are 3 pretty exciting classifications of construction, type A, B and C. The higher the building, the bigger the building, the crazier the classification. So as soon as somebody sleeps there, it's classification A, B, C. So we have a thing called fire resistant levels, FRLs. And FRLs, fire resistant levels, is much higher, obviously, at a higher building than it has a lower building. So at 1 level shop, we'll actually have not much fire separation at all, or fire resistance. The fire brigade don't really care about your building, by the way. They just care that it doesn't spread. Insurances look after your building. Alternative solution. Will you want to know about it? Alternative solutions. We'll get rid of that. Okay, we've got a building code of Australia. It's also called the National Construction Code. It gives you a defined way to design a building. But there are certain buildings you can't design within the building code. An example, shopping centres. You cannot really build a decent sized shopping centre within the building code, because they're big and long, they're big and wide, and to get the return, they need a lot of shops in it. So if you look at Melbourne Central or Northland or Chadstone, there's no way you can build that within the building code. So what they do is they have a thing called alternative solutions, and now called performance solutions, and also called fire engineering. So if you're building within a the building code, you build deemed to satisfy. So you're deemed to satisfy the building code. Once you can't do it, you have an alternative solution. You need an alternative solution. Or these days they call it a performance solution, because within the building code you have the performance requirement. We want the building to act this way. We want you to have this sort of egress. We want nominated distance to exits. We want this level of safety all the way through the building. Okay, well, we're going to do that, but we're not going to stick with all these distances and regulations, all these qualifications under deemed to satisfy. We're going to do it a bit differently. So we have a performance solution. Performance solutions are usually generated by fire engineers. So what they'll do is they'll give you a wager. So what they'll say, if you want this, we want you to do this. If you want this as well, we want more of this. And this part here is usually human behaviour, controlled behaviour. So if you want to have longer corridors and you want to have bigger, vast areas, it's to do with getting more people out. Double door here, double doors at the back, bigger volumes to get a lot of people out at once. Okay, well, I only want a single door here because it doesn't work, we haven't got enough room. So what they'll probably do is put some sort of smoke separation and concealment, or you're not allowed to have certain fabrics in here, you're not allowed to have this, not allowed to have that. Everybody in here has to be inducted every time we come in here. There'll be all these performance requirements over the top of it. Maintaining them, it's a bit crazy. So they do a lot of modelling, digital modelling, and they work out the best way. There's heaps and heaps of modelling. If you ever go to the MCG on a big game, there are a lot of fire engineers, statisticians, watching you leave the premises, especially if it's a close game. They grab so much data that you would not believe. They grab data on how people walk, how many people, the speed of people. It's all got cameras, they've got them everywhere. And they're looking at the actual human behaviour of people, how they operate. How many punch-ons there were, how much disturbances, how many people coming up against them, and how people walk. Like, people just don't walk in a straight line, they swagger. Swaggering means that if you're going to build a fire stair and you want 2 abreast, people don't walk like this, they actually walk in a bit clumsy, so you need to have them wider. So that actually impacts on the whole design construction. If you've got a big stadium and they all empty at once, what happens when people come out? Do they all funnel into one spot or do they fan out? If you go to the MCG after a big game, you look at the crowd, they just spread. Everybody wants their own little space. Even if they're heading to Jollymont Station, they sort of all crowd around and all end up there. None of this caterpillar effect where you're in a row. But engineers design all that. If you go to the airport, Jetstar's way down the end. Annoying everybody go to Jetstar terminal, it's long. It's huge. It's so annoying. They're putting walkways in at the moment. The only reason is just to slow people down, to spread the mass of people. They could have put the gate further around and made it really quick, but there's two facts. They're spreading the amount of people, giving more movement of people. There's lots of indications in the tiles that you will never recognise to sort of flow you through. When they get the food court, everybody spreads out. Then it comes through to the exit where they condense people again. And it's all to do with moderating the flow. The other part of it's a bit of practicality to make sure that the bags get there by the time you're there to stop the flow out the carousels. So this is all about human movement and human behaviour. They've worked it out. They've got a pretty good understanding. Back to my notes, so I don't get too lost. And here's the document. We've got all that. We're going to talk about probability, but let's just talk about maintenance for a minute. We've got a certificate here. We've talked very briefly about classification. We've talked about the use of it. So we've got a use, office, lab, lobby, ancillary plant, class 5. Offices, class 5. Car parks, 7A. Horrible things, car parks. Cars tend to catch fire. Horrible. And they're usually prone to vandalism. High incidence of issues in car parks, let me tell you. Conditions. Okay, I'm going to give you an occupancy permit. Here's your conditions, straight out of the regulations. Essential safety measures listed in Appendix A must be maintained to the level specified. And here comes the measures. This is just a fairly generic one. I've got occupancy permits with measures that go up to 17 pages. And every one of these needs to be looked at by a suitably qualified person. This is a Victorian one, so paths of travel, pretty inert, pretty normal thing. Walking through the building, make sure it's all clear, every 3 months. Not nationally, just Victoria and a few other states. Up here, there's got building fire integrity for all these individual elements of their building which need to be inspected so the whole thing works together. Fire doors. In this code, it's every 3 months, but there's other codes that's 6 months and things like that. We move down to the more exciting things, sprinkler systems. Monthly. So a contractor turns up monthly to do a test. It goes on and on and on and on. And here's the reason why. Try to get this up. All these elements are worked out, the frequencies to do with the probability of failure, which is the probability of risk. Risk is, if anything can go wrong, there is a risk. So the definition of risk, if something goes wrong, there's a risk. If nothing can go wrong, there's no risk involved. But as soon as you've got an element where something can go wrong, you've got a risk. The reason what we do all these maintenances is to control the risks. Probability. We've got a fire system, a fire pump. We've got a static water tank, we've got a fire pump, we've got connectors to the street for the brigade to hook into, and we've got installations that when it gets a sprinkler head goes off, we'll punch water through it and spray the water out. Okay? Every one of those components has a probability of failure. If you maintain it and you check it frequently, the probability will decrease. So, let's say we start down very low probability. Say we break it down to months. Say these are indicators for months. And every time we maintain it, the probability comes down because we've tested it. Before the maintenance, you're not quite sure because stuff happens. So the probability to rise, then it come down. Rise, then come down on the test. Rise, then come down on the test. You have this pattern. The bigger the risk, the more important the item, the higher the risk. So if a sprinkler set doesn't work or a mechanical set doesn't work, the huge risk. But in reality, say these are years now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we go up to, say, 30, which is getting on when you're a piece of machinery, the probability of failure will escalate up to a point where the probability is usually pretty much confirmed. It will break down. It won't work. Plant and equipment doesn't last forever. If it actually runs, it has a life cycle. In budgeting world, it's a nightmare. If you've got an element here where the cost of maintaining it because it keeps failing will probably outweigh the usefulness of having it. So if you're spending 100 grand a year on maintaining something that's worth 70 grand, why are you doing that? There has to be a juicy point right here where you replace that unit. But if you maintain it properly, the probability of failure decreases quite substantially. And this is what we look at. With every item, the probability of failure of egress is almost absolute. Between inspections, so now we're back to 3 monthly, because that's what it says here, the probability of failure is like this. Because these damn humans do funny things in buildings. Block exits, lock doors. It's very cheap to lock a door. You know, $30 will buy you a slide bolt. And if you're a bit worried about security, you fit a slide bolt. Unfortunately, if there's an incident, you may not be able to get out. All these lever arch handlers are all designed to be able to get out. When you go through the university, look at all the hardware. Everything will be, if you fell on the door, it'll open. It might be a small office, it might open inwards, but on general, if you fall on it, or if you get pushed into it, if you're in a nightclub or into a bar, they might have push bars. It's all to do with the fact, and it's all engineering around death because people panic, that you'll hit the door spring open, away you go. Deaths happen at doors. In Connie Zhang's case, there was no doors, couldn't get it, death happened at the opening. So, same thing. So all these little things, all these little tricks are worked out to get the probability of you getting out. If you put locks on the door, probability is absolute. You will probably have a fairly large issue. You may be okay, but the probability is pretty high. This is what it's all about. How do you know what you're maintaining? How do you know what all these things are? Well, as property managers, you can go and walk around with a guy like me, get to know it all, but essentially you don't need to know. Okay? But you need to know who to ask. This brings back to the GP thing again. If you've got a doctor who doesn't know what disease you've got, at least he knows where to look up, or he refers you to a specialist. Or she refers you to a specialist. And then we get to the scary stuff, the courtroom stuff. Why do you focus on essential safety measures? Property managers are acting as agents and representatives to the owner. So you're acting on behalf of the owner. Focus on ESM, risk mitigation. You don't want your owner's name in the papers. No, I'm not going to do that. We've got a client, it's a convenience store client, fairly big, 7-Eleven, they won't mind me talking about them. Their risk profile is huge. And it's not their problem, it's not their fault. Or it's actually their fault for being so prominent. So if you work for somebody like 7-Eleven, and there's an issue on site, if you've got a property that's owned by 7-Eleven, there's an issue on site that's got nothing to do with the store, the first thing that comes up when there's a news broadcast is there was a stabbing outside 7-Eleven. They have this identity which is always in the news because it's an icon. It's like that ad at the moment about McDonald's. McDonald's, turn left at the second McDonald's on the right, whatever it is. They're using it as an icon, but actually, in fact, it's like an emblem, and it's actually getting some, if it's in the news the bad way, it reflects on the emblem. So stabbing outside 7-Eleven, don't go to 7-Elevens, there's always stabbing outside of them. So they have this perceived culture they've got to protect all the time, or this identity they've got to protect. Risk mitigation, if there's a fire in a 7-Eleven, they can't have it. Can't have it, they can't have bad press. They can't have the insurance issues that go along with it. Okay? There's also the fact that if you've got a super fund and you get fined by council, it's a big red mark on your disclosure to hand over to your shareholders. If you adhere to the regulations and codes, there's fines, there's penalties, and if you don't do it and something happens, there's a death on site, there's an incident on fire, if you don't adhere to them, you'll be the loose part of the parcel, your loose link in the chain. Reporting to clients. Clients can be slightly demanding. I've got, at the moment, 14,000 buildings which we look after around Australia. So it's a big industry, it's growing. And every one of those clients, every one of those buildings is very, very important to somebody, and that client wants to know at any time what's happening on that site in regards to essential safety measures. It's a huge thing. We've got a client like Woolworths. We've got, umpteen thousand stores of Woolies. They watch it like a hawk. Essential safety measures. They've got teams of people looking after it. Budgeting. At the end of the day, you've got to pay for all this. The more complex the building, the more expensive it is to maintain. You can't really take too many shortcuts on it. If you take shortcuts, you might get the worse result than what you ever wanted in your whole life. It could be an absolute detriment to the building. If you use bad contractors, so be it. If you don't fix things, the building will slowly get worse and worse and worse and be an absolute risk. Accountability, brand exposure, peace of mind, and simply because it's the law. End of story. I look after Accor hotels. The French guys come to town. Why do we need to do it? It's the law. It's the law. Do it. None of this, we're thinking about it. No, it's the law. Simple. But then it gets all messy. We've got statutory law obligations in relation to maintenance. There's state-specific requirements. There's state non-specific. Conflict between building regs and fire safety regs. They don't quite talk properly. And there's other laws. And this is what somebody was talking about before, about Commonwealth laws. There's other things we need to talk into. There's childcare, there's OH&S, there's emergency planning, there's aged care facilities. The aged care facilities have very different requirements. Marine, very different requirements. Again, mining, they've got their own legislation and regulations over the top of everything else. So they've got to dance two dances at the same time. And here's my favourite one. The common law duty of care. This is sort of blown out when you're dealing with federal sites. If you're dealing with an airport, they actually run off a thing called the Samaritan Act. So in federal world, there's a Crimes Act not to do the right thing. And also it's a Crimes Act to enable the wrong thing to happen. So knowingly know that something's not been done right. And that can come down to building maintenance. If you are an agent or a contractor not doing the right thing and you don't report it, then somebody's trying to make cheap or somebody's trying to cut back on stuff. If you don't get that in hand and try and get it done, it actually comes back as a Crimes Act. And crimes means jail. Straight down the line. No fines, in the big house. It's a bit of a weird one. A duty of care is typically described as a requirement that a person act towards others and the public with watchfulness, attention, caution and prudence, that a reasonable person in the circumstances would. If a person's actions do not meet this standard of care, then their actions are considered negligent, and any damages resulting may be claimed in a lawsuit for negligence. It's a pretty big one. So if you don't do the right thing all the time in the world of property, you can be held accountable all the way through. I put this one in here because this one comes up all the time when we talk to, or when I'm talking to property managers, because at the end of the day, everybody who works for their boss, so we've got facility managers and property managers, and we've got account directors and client managers, and we've got all the rest of them, all the different structures. At the end of the day, they've all got all fall under the common law duty of care to do the right thing by their client all the time. Does that happen? More often than not. Got a fair bit to go. So the secrets. Know your contractors. If you're going to be a PM, know your consultants. Know your tenants. Know people. Because the better the relationship, the better it goes. Again, I'll rabbit on about the fact we've got 14,000 buildings, but I can tell you which ones work best. The ones that have the direct relationship with their sites. So the big industrial funds have got all these facility managers by different firms. Those guys know the guys on site, and the tenants are, we're talking big distribution centres, huge. There's lots of money. It costs them millions and millions of dollars to maintain these places. That relationship works. Everybody's happy. The place works well. If you've got an owner who's disengaged and doesn't want to spend any money, the building will be in disarray within 1 year, almost guaranteed. And if you don't have an occupant that's happy with you, that if it fractures, you'll never, your job will be impossible to a point where you want to just leave it. Seek quality advice. This is the big one, and that's probably why I'm here. And last year, we were talking with Peter Northwood, was basically seek advice. I did a presentation to the Property Council and all the rest of it. If you sign off your own building, and that's an annual, that document is required to be backed up by an annual certification, and you have property agents and you sign off the building, you're mad. You haven't, go back to that occupancy permit. Are you familiar with every one of those? Are you guaranteed you've got processes in place to stipulate it's all been signed off and it's all been done properly and everything's performing right, and you're getting the right pressures, you're getting the right this, and the mechanical systems work? No way. Put a consultant in place, let them take the risk. That's what I do. That's why I was awake at 1 o'clock last night and I haven't been able to get back to bed. Got a bit of a problem at a site up in Sydney. It's bumping around my head. Seek assurances processes, and that's audits and reviews. And that could be for everything. That could be from cleaning, that can be accounting, that can be your budgeting, all the way through. Relations of occupants, talked about that, and relations with the FMs, ops, engineers, caretakers, whatever you want to call them. Every building has a different terminology for people who look after their buildings. Engineers is the same, is in a hotel, is the same as a facility manager in a factory. Same job, different titles. So they're the property managers, because you're looking at the end of the day, you're looking at leases, you're looking at funds, you're looking at money, you're looking at delivering a good return on the investment. If you don't look after your FMs, it won't work, because they're the guys at the front line who need to support the buildings and the tenants. If it works well, it works really, really well. Now I'm going to drag you all the way back. And we're going to talk very quickly about the fourth line down, Sheargold Weir Report, Building in Confidence. And the BMF, which is the Building Ministers Forum, initiation of recommendation. Let's screw all the way back. All right. This is what happened when it goes wrong, and this is a bit of a heads up of where we are in the environment. You know, you may not be practicing in property manager next year, as you said, or in the future, but if you do, things are moving in our industry. And it's all to do with the fact that the state's stuffed up. Absolutely knackered the whole system. All these fires, this is the Connie Zhang fire, by the way. We've got Opal, we've got Lacrosse fires, and we've got some, this is called the Torch, believe it or not, overseas. Great name. It actually caught fire twice. And it's a cladding. The whole thing didn't work. Nothing really moved until this happened. Does everybody know what this fire is? The London one, yeah, this is the Grenfell one. It only got a lot of airplay because people perished. 78 people perished. If that was a fire like Lacrosse or the Torch and Nero, and, well, Connie's a bit different, not much would have happened. So what they did, when Lacrosse happened, they put a lot of studies per state. Now go forward and find out which buildings got cladding, and let's find out where we all went wrong, and let's get it all happening, and it's moved very slowly. The Grenfell came along, absolute disaster, same process, same principle. Everybody does understand it's a composite panel on the outside of the building that is essentially 2 sheets of aluminium filled with petrol. So it's filled with styrene, and the styrene once it gets fire, it burns up and down a building, so the external of the building. That case alone is a disaster because of multiple, a bit like Connie Zhang, multiple issues that were wrong. It was a cacophony of mistakes. They didn't have hydrant pressure. They taught the tenants to stay within their rooms. It was a social welfare housing, so there was lots of junk on site. The stairwell, one common stair down the middle, so it's like an atrium, was full of crap. Bikes and rubbish and furniture, because people's apartments are small, they had a lot of stuff. Their kids come and stay, they got all their wardrobes and bikes and boxes. It was everywhere. It was chockers. And being lower social economic housing, lots of cheap furniture, plastics and moderated materials like composite board are full of PCBs, so it's plastics, burn up, lots of smoke, people die of smoke. So what they did is they started thinking, they did a research, and it's called the Building in Confidence by Peter Sheargold and Bronwyn Weir. They looked at the whole industry. They broke it down to 24 recommendations. So much so, and now we're in the implementation stage. So each state is responsive to these 24 recommendations, and so it's to do with design, construction, products, and handover. I'm at the handover stage. So when a building's finished, what information do you need to maintain the building for the life of the building? So better design, better everything with it. The building code's already moved. And 9B, good old childcare. It's a big issue. Building code has moved. They realise that's an issue, and they're going to do something about it. The building code has moved, and they're actually stipulating within the building code how many inspections are required per site over a certain size during construction. That's a regulatory item. They've taken that onus away from the regulators because they're not doing the right thing. So they're putting it in the building code. It's a really strong moment in the construction industry. So surveyors, if they're going to design it, they have to actually, part of their design is inspections. And they have to show, a good example is a residential tower, all the walls are fire-rated plasterboard if they're not masonry, and they actually have to see that what's behind the board, the construction, how they've been finished off, if it's double layer, how they're actually sealing the one underneath, all the penetrations, all the gas lines that go through the ceiling and the water lines and electrical, if they're all sealed, so it's compartment. Once they prove that you're doing it in that method, you can keep going. And they'll come and check, spear up spasmodically during the floor fit out. Huge cost. But it's about time surveyors got off their butts and did stuff. So what they're doing is and when you get back to probability, they're decreasing the probability of failure all the way through. Probability of failure with cladding was extreme. It was absolute. All right. That's my little soapbox, by the way, if you didn't gather. And here, controlled risks. Everybody remember there's been a couple of fires. I don't have the slides here, it's on a different presentation. There was a fire last year in Yarraville. That's absolutely ruined the creek down there, by the way. It was basically a clandestine drug lab that got set afire. Asbestos roof, caught fire. They didn't go in because it was dangerous chemicals and it was asbestos area, so they fought it from outside. Lots of water went down the creeks, killing the creek. They will regenerate over time. And there's been a couple around in Campbellfield as well, where guys have been stockpiling materials because they can't sell it, or they need to sell it in bulk to make a return. If you're the owner, which this lady apparently was when I got the image, and you've got that fuel load in a warehouse, if there's an ignition source, what's the likelihood of that building surviving? And you're the owner, and you've handed it to a leasing agent, and they've sent it out to SKM Recycling, whatever recycling firm, and they've filled it up with plastics. Do you know? You're the owner, so you've got a fund, you've got a super place, and it looks good from the outside if trucks coming and going, and they're paying a good rent. And you go inside, it's one huge block of plastic. Huge. There's no fire separation, there's no bunding, there's no separation of zones, so if one catches fire, you can actually get around it and pull it apart. This is just one chunk of plastic, or two chunks of plastic. If this was to catch fire, and fires happen, the forklift might have a spark, cigarette, and predominantly, there's been 2 warehouse fires in Melbourne in the last 2 years by cigarettes. And but we have to look at the enormity of that action, is that the cigarettes and forklifts, there's about 8 forklift fires that caused major incineration of warehouses. But are they controlled risks? Stuff happens. You might have a short, you might have a blown light bulb that just pops and goes down, enough to melt the plastic, a bit of wind, away she goes. There's no way this building has been designed for this load at all. So what do? Do you evict them? They've cancelled their lease, now they've got, $8 million worth of stuff to get out. I recommend engineer out the issue and don't let it happen in the first place. Okay, so that's all that risk profiles. You control it or you engineer it out. If somebody comes to you and they've got 1 million cubic metres of plastic, they want to warehouse it, maybe not. Okay, but they're running on a risk, and the risk is absolute here. All right, that will end up like that. And I'm going to end up, because you're going to do some stuff, so I'm going to get close, which I think you much more appreciate than me rabbiting on about essential safety measures, because I'm going to hammer and get more questions out, so you do well. I try and revise these all the time. I've got, I don't know, we do a presentation at the end of the year, who's got the worst disaster, who's got the best disaster from all my auditors. So there's about 30 of my guys out there running around, and I'll get a couple of text messages a day. It's hysterical what people do. There's one here, and I said it last time, and I'll try and remember it next time. This is my favourite one of all. So security. The building code doesn't talk about security much, only prisons, because they're about getting people out. You can have security and compliance and be able to get out, but slide bolts are pretty damn cheap. Shove them on everything. Panel beater shop, bit dodgy, barred the door because didn't want theft. There's a better photo of the window here, smashed open where they've climbed in and ransacked his place. So it doesn't work. It's more important to get people out. You can have security. Storage issue here. There's a fire stair behind that. This is on a high-rise building, so sprinkles all the rest of it. There is actually a fire stair. So that's your primary escape route if there's an incident behind there. Again, had a bit of a phobia that people could actually get through the stairs, so they closed it all off. And this one, this is a hydrant point, this is a hose rule. So primary for the fire brigade, for the tenants to fight a fire. All been decommissioned, but the contractor was still charging for it. Absolute rot. They had 7 years of never going to site. The whole thing was disarrayed and invoiced them for 7 years. There's a lot more. We're talking a big paddock here, a big factory. And this is the sort of level that people have been nicking copper and done it. And there was no water in the lines. There was no nothing. Complete and utter disaster. These guys got sued big time. These guys got broken into, and these guys are just idiots. It's no longer there. We had a bit of a chat. And the two top words, perspiration over litigation. This is one from Knight Frank, property manager, many, many years ago. He's a smart guy. He's still in the industry, still well sought after in the property council and all the rest of it, and all the new employees he gets. So if you have perspiration, if you have more perspiration than is needed, you won't get litigated. If you work harder, you do all the right things, the chances of litigation are minimal. Work hard, be smart, and your risks down. All right, so to wrap it up, a building is built in Australia with a condition that needs to be maintained. The maintenance is set by the regulators or by the surveyors or whatever mechanism in place. The owner's obligation is to maintain the building for the life of the building. Every component of your building has separate components that need to be maintained at a certain frequency. And every one of those items may have a different contractor, and you may have 10 different contractors on site to maintain a building, even not more. Various different contractors for the various different installations and components you got. If they all work and they're all maintained and they all perform correctly, and you do fire mode tests where you put the building in fire mode and you make sure everything works, the probability of failure and the chance of survival is really, really high. On the flip side, you'll be able to certify your building and get an annual certificate. In Victoria, it's called Annual Essential Safety Message Report. New South Wales Annual Fire Safety Statement. On we go and on we go. If you've got that certificate and it's a legitimate certificate, it's a bit of what you're doing is declaring the building as safe to occupy from here on for the next year, as long as you keep everything going forward. All right? If you do any building works that alter with a premises, get building permits. Do not think that you can build building works at any time without a building permit. There are structures and regulations in play. They might be a bit whiffy, but that's at the top end. If a tenant mucks around with a site, be warily aware of it. If a tenant changes use of a site, you have to know. If you're leasing out a property and it was a warehouse, you want to turn it into a showroom, so yeah, go ahead, do it. You know, we'll give you a good deal. Don't do it unless you've got surveyors involved and you do a reissue an occupancy permit. Because there's different maps and different things required for different components. If you've got a high-rise building, you want to sub out level 7 for a hair salon institute, which used to be quite common in Melbourne, do it through a permit process. Get advice all the way through. Don't move in the construction world and the property world without getting second advice on all elements. And remember, I'm just talking about essential safety measures. There's so many other elements that you need to maintain. Cooling towers, so there's health and safety regs that you need combined with that with risk cooling tower assessments need to go to councils. There's backflow devices you need to have regulated and tested. There's all these little components all the way through. Legionella testing on microbial control testing for mechanical systems. DDA, so disability and access and control. So people in wheelchairs, blind, impairments, whatever it is, they have to be able to get in the building safely and equitably all the way through the building as well. Waste disposal, security, lighting, all the rest of it. There's all these different elements that you're going to have to manage and control and be aware of as you get into the world. Get advice and do a lot of research. And at the end of the year, when you've got all your certificates lined up and you've got your compliance system in your thing, and you get a good KPI, KPI usually equals money. At the end of the day, I can tell you when CBRE, certain portfolios up for their KPIs, it's on it's next Monday, by the way, on this one portfolio I'm dealing with, and they are going hammer and tong because on Tuesday they'll get their KPI, and if they get their expected KPI, it's cash to them, income, because it's their reward. Tick, you've done it. That's the way the owners are controlling the FMs to get what they need. All right, you go to a meeting, a big meeting, big board meeting, first thing up, OH&S, essential safety measures. Be line number one, believe it or not. Don't worry about the budgets and all that crap. Risk. What's our risk? Are we under control? Are we safe? Are we going to have bad press? No one's going to die on our properties. Well, not as far as we can tell. We're doing everything possible we can. All right? They're the take-home points. Well, bit scary, a bit real world, but hey, at the end of the day, you don't want people dying on your properties and you don't want to be responsible. If people do die on your property, and it does happen, people die all the time, unfortunately, as long as you've got the processes in place that it wasn't done by a fire or an emergency incident. And stuff does happen, and how you respond to it, that's how you have to control that as well. I sort of jumbled that one around a bit, but because I just want you guys to do a bit more hassling. So, any questions? I know you don't want to know anything. Come on, give me one.
Obviously, the building's designed based on what we think we're going to use it for. How are hospitals designed, since some people can't move?
Hospitals are really cool. I like talking about hospitals. How many people have been into a hospital lately? I go quite a lot. I've got a really bad back. And when I walk around and after I've had my surgery, I quite find fascinating. We're going to draw a floor plan of a hospital. Oh, sorry. We've got lifts here, say. We've got a reception area here. We've got service rooms here. We might have a couple of wards here. Sorry. Well. And we'll have wards. Private rooms, group rooms, depends how lucky you are. Does that make sense? All right. And we'll have stairs. We'll have stairs. You ever been into a lift in a hospital and realised the lifts are really big? And they transport people quite a lot. So you'll have your active lifts and you'll have a good lift where they bring all the sick people in or from surgery or whatever into the recovery area. Lifts are quite important. Come back. So they will use people around like that. But hospitals have got a thing called intense fire separation and smoke separation. So every 500 square metres, there'll be smoke doors and fire doors. So if you're walking down a corridor in a hospital, you'll see doors everywhere. So if there's an incident down here, old Beryl's decided to have a bit of a problem and set her bed alight, they'll evacuate all these people into a different smoke zone. So they're in beds, they're in wheels, don't let them walk, they shove you on a bed. Even if you're ambulant, at least you're able to move, they'll shove you on a bed, lie down, we got you, they'll move you out. They'll move you into the areas, they'll put you in the corridors, there's enough room in the corridors for the beds. They'll fight the fire, they'll move you through. The bigger one, say this is an operating theatre. Okay, we've got a couple of operating theatres. What do you do if there's a fire? It's amazing. There are many, many fires in operating theatres, I found out. There are many fires. They don't do much. They actually put the fire out because each room is a controlled environment. They'll deal with it, they'll save the person, they'll move on. Okay, they'll deal with it there. The fire services will do everything around them and they'll move the patient when they're safe. They have a principle in place, so they have an actual operational procedure. So it's a bit of an alternative solution. The one thing we talked about where people are sleeping, you have many, many fire separation, much more fire appliances and much more detection, suppression and all the rest of it. You'll have double knock detectors in the rooms. You'll have everything in a hotel, in a hospital, and pretty much aged care facility too. They're funny places. They're really well regulated. The other thing they have is staff. They have trained staff on hand all the time. Hotel, huge risk. People asleep, drugged, drunk, whatever it is, disorientated. A school, same size, bigger institution, has a lot less fire suppression or detection systems because of staff. And, all going well, awake, so alert. So the staff will action get all the kids out. Right? Sometimes the time, like childcare, takes a long time to get them out, so we've got to engineer that in. In hotel, or my worst, in cinemas, cinemas scare the crap out of me. You go into a late showing and it ends up at like 11:30 at night and count how much staff there are on hand. And you see how many people are in the auditoriums. You'll have an 18-year-old at the candy counter. The projectionist may not even be on site because they might run it from a central system because it's all digital these days. And they may have another guy who's going to help clean up a bit afterwards, but they'll clean it in the morning, just make sure there's nothing really gross. Just do a security check, no one's sleeping in there. So maybe two, like a 19-year-old and an 18-year-old at 10:30 or 11:30 at night or 1 o'clock in the morning. And there's a fire in an auditorium. Cinemas have a few fires, let me tell you. People do weird stuff, they get bored and they set light to their seat. It happens amazingly often. Worries me. Hotels are a disaster. Hotels get looked at by councils all the time. Because councils are the regulators that have control over impending fines. In Melbourne, every hotel gets looked at quite often. And if you don't comply, they'll make you fix stuff. They'll fine you, big time. Pubs, same thing. Hospitals, hardly. Hospitals have got a funny thing as well. And this is carrying on to stuff you probably never need to know about. And this is how the design development, just so you can understand it. Hospitals also run on a thing called capital development guidelines. So capital development, so cash. So what happened is years ago, government hospitals were built on that code. Everything else was built on this code. They got to a point where they said, well, there's one code, bring it in. The hospital's code wasn't as stringent in some elements as the building code of Australia. So what they do every 5 years, they do audits of the hospitals to see what areas are lacking in code and suggest they spend money. So the Alfred in Commercial Road, it has parts of that building which are really old. And parts of their theatres and that are really, really new. So every now and then, they'll wipe out a ward and they'll do the ward up to bring it up to code. And they cycle it through. So the building is constantly being upgraded, so they're increasing the fire safety at all the times. Hospitals are funny things. It's okay. I spent a lot of time working on them and certifying them. Very high risk. Surprise, surprise. Got another one.
Does anyone else have questions? No, all good.
All good.
Then we'll thank Bruce.
All right. But if you have to questions, you do get in the industry, look me up. They call me the answering machine for some reason. I don't mind giving general public or general clients. You don't have to be a client of mine. It's all one big happy industry. And it's a bit of a shoddy industry too. So lots of advice from wacky people. Sorry? Questions?
In the future, we can email to you.
Yep, bring it on.
Mail at
ADS, right?
B Doyle.
The one on the PowerPoint?
Yeah, that'll go through. That'll get through to me. Yep, mail at ASC. It's a big bucket of emails. I will get to them.
So much.
No worries. Good luck with your exams and your assessments. Your last essay. What a project? What is it? Essay?
Yeah, there are assignments. due
Assignment. Sorry,
this
that's the
week,
word.
I think. Yeah, we'll take a break for 5 minutes and then we'll recommence.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. No, it's okay. Sort of got mumbled this time. Did a prezzo the other day and I was sort of running on that one. I was, oh no, I'm talking about the wrong thing.
Oh no, I could tell that you were trying to keep it.
Keep it moving. Trying to keep them away.
Well, I like the stories.
The stories are the best. I should add more of them. I've got a prezzo over in Sydney on Thursday and I filled it with pictures because they're all just like, they just get hammered all the time. Like, oh, they just, you know, it's an industrial fund and it's just, they are just hammered. They're poor guys. I feel sorry for them, but
I can't stay away.
no, they don't want to hear it all again. Come on. We spent all our days dealing with this. So, here's some pictures. All right.
Thank you. I'll just.
Oh, yeah. I don't want this.
Don't think about take that with you. Thank you so much. Hopefully, we'll see you next year as well. Thanks, Bruce. right, guys, should we make a start? Thank you. That's very helpful. I should bring my daughter's shusher along. She has something which goes shh, shh, until she falls asleep. I should really bring that along. But I'm going to finish up. Well, I have the next half an hour because Bruce finished early. Basically, what we're going to go through today is a review of the topics we've done. Nothing very in-depth, just something to give you, sort of an overall structure of what we've done so far on my part. Did Kusal did a review when he finished? Not really, okay. So you know what? Fire the questions at him during your tutorial, okay? I'm doing a review on my topics. Nothing in depth, just to give you an overview in case you've missed out on something. At least you can go back and look at it, in case you were sick one day or something. And then we'll talk about the exam a little bit. And I know that there's probably questions on the assignment, okay? So I've sort of opened up the assignment brief document, and I might spend a few minutes just running through some parts of it, because I know some people have issues interpreting what we're expecting of you, all right? What we're expecting of you is probably not as complex as what a lot of you are picturing at the moment, okay? So we'll get to that, all right? But bear with me, I'll just quickly run through the topics. So one of the key points we were trying to get to you at the start in the first few lectures is that obviously the underlying value of property is money, right? And the way we generate money with properties are through leases, right? Without leases, you basically don't generate any income for your property. And so that's why it's so important for us to, for the leases to be very well written legally, so that you can go after your money in case something goes wrong. So just make sure you know the 4 essential elements in leases, your 4 P's, premise, parties, period, payment, and these are all key to economic sustainability of it, all right? In terms of environmental sustainability of it, we've touched on that a little bit, about green leases, etc. But I'm not going to focus too much on that at the moment. All right, and then Peter went through quite a few key components in leases, a whole range of topics in which you should familiarize yourself with, not just for the exam, but just preparing yourself when you go out to the workforce. All right. And then we went through the triple bottom line approach of reporting, the 3 underlying that organizations look at. So depending on whether you're a for-profit or not-for-profit, you have different focuses, but the common 3 bottom line approaches that organizations look at is economic, social, and environmental impacts, all right? So economic is obviously focusing on returns, costs, and valuation of the property. Social is focusing on how is this asset contributing to the society, creating a community and servicing it. And lastly, environmental is focusing on, how efficient are we, how much waste are we producing, and these are and we sort of have a few not regulations, a few sort of certifications, stars to help keep us on track. So we have Neighbours, Green Star, BEC. Chris covered last week how all of this differed. So make sure you understand that. Very interestingly, in environmental, we have sort of this split incentive problem, circle of blame, which is sort of, hindering us from going forward because we can't identify who is responsible for what. Okay, so the circle of blame is, developers can actually build sustainable buildings, but who's going to pay for it? The capital expenditure may be paid for by the landlord, but then at the end of the day, the people benefiting from it are the occupiers who are actually paying for these expenses. And then, so where do investors get their return, right? Does the income that they generate justify putting in all these environmental sustainability aspects into a building? Okay, then we also went through real estate management, 4 aspects of it. Asset management facilities, CREM, and property management. So going into the exam, I highly advise you to at least be able to differentiate this, okay? The starting point, if you can't differentiate this, go and revise it. Make sure you fully understand how they differ, right? So for example, if, you know, what do each of them do sort of on a daily basis? What do their, you know, what are their responsibilities? Who's in charge of what? I'm not going to run through all these definitions. You can read that up yourself. They're straight out of your lecture slides. But I'm just going to bring up this diagram here. I like this diagram because this diagram helps me to explain who does what, right? So all of you should have a good background on this, real estate supply and real estate demand, right? A lot of this supply chain construction stuff, as property students, we're not as involved in those. But the for real estate management perspective, this is how they differ, right? Someone has to own these assets, let's say investors or super funds. If you have a large sort of super fund with several assets, people who help manage those assets are asset managers, right? But they manage it on quite a high level sort of perspective, sort of portfolio. Everyone has their own little portfolio to work with. They can't get down to the nitty-gritty tasks every day, right? So that's why we have property managers and facility managers to help us out with the nitty-gritty bits. The difference between them is that facility managers are more focused at the operational side of things, making sure that the building is working not just on a daily basis, on a minute, hourly basis, to ensure that the tenants can operate smoothly within the building. Because if the building doesn't operate well, then no one wants to lease our building, right? Property managers are sort of the in-between between FM and AM. They deal with a little bit of FM, but a lot of what they do is also to do with leasing, keeping the property up to date, and they're also the communication channels between the two. Asset management is it's more focusing on how can we generate the returns that our investors need for assets. And you know, sometimes that might involve actually going backwards to do some development in order to bring the building up to date and to generate the returns that we need. They do a bit of leasing, but the main leases are done by property managers. They might only do very big deals with very large anchor tenants or a very long-term lease in the building. So that being said, asset management, facilities management, and property management, they all sort of sit on the real estate supply side, okay? Which means they all sort of work for the investors. CREM is the only one that sits on the demand side, okay? So when we talk about CREM, it's how can we manage our clients' portfolio such that they're getting maximum output from their real estate, right? So it might be working for a large client like NAP and saying, hey, I've sort of examined your portfolio. I think this would be best for you. And from our example the last time, it was consolidating the entire portfolio, bringing them from 12 to 20 buildings to 3 main buildings so that they can reap several of the benefits of actually having their people together, okay? So that's the main difference between CREM and the rest, which is CREM sits here, everyone else sits here, okay? There's a lot more in that, and make sure you go through your slides and study that before the exam, okay? What do we have next? And then after that, we continue into exploring retail properties and how they are managed, okay? So make sure you understand what retail premises are, what are some exclusions, okay? What are excluded by, say, the minister or by the act, such that those premises will not fall under a retail premise. For example, organizations that are listed on the stock exchange, they're not a retail premise. Make sure you kind of know all of that. Those are factual, okay? You can't do a guesstimate and expect to score full marks for that section. If you don't know it, you just don't know it, okay? All of these as well, they're all very factual, but very crucial for you to know, okay? Especially going into the industry, all right? So make sure you know all the obligations of, say, a landlord. What are you obliged to offer a landlord if they're a considered a retail premise? What sort of time frames are in place for you to do what? Okay. And then we talked about different types of retail premise, how they differ. And then we also talked about sustainability, in which I'm not going to read through because, oh wait, I better go through this. Okay, so we then talk a bit about sustainability in retail properties. I'll go through this because I don't think it was in your slides. I can't quite remember. But firstly, economic sustainability in retail premise. They're basically facing very substantial challenges due to online channels, online shopping, etc. And so I think we discussed in class how they can cope with that. How do we cope with the challenges of online shopping? And one main solution that is being offered is look at your tenancy mix. What are your tenants offering? Are they offering experience-based services, right? Because that's what people can't get from online shopping. You can't get a manicure from shopping online. You can't get a massage from shopping online. You don't get to hang out with people from shopping online. So that's what you can offer to help out with the economic side of things, okay? In terms of social sustainability, we need to remember that at the end of the day, physical retail stores are spaces for people to socialize, and this contributes to their sense of place, well-being, and community, while providing people fundamental things. In terms of environmental sustainability, a lot of large shopping malls are spending a lot of money these days to deal with that, because operation cost is a major expense in a shopping mall, all right? It runs a lot, and so the cost is very extensive. And at the same time, a lot of them are trying to bring in a more natural environment, because obviously if you go into a building and it's fully confined, you don't feel very great when you walk out of it, okay? So that's what they're trying to do at the moment. And then for today's topic, we went through essential safety measures, also known as essential services, on how buildings can be better managed, all right? So obviously Bruce has already covered this, and I'm not going to elaborate. The key point is that you guys have to be aware of it, because if it's not managed, it can be super detrimental, all right? In terms of looking at it from a triple bottom line approach, if essential services are not managed well, in terms of social sustainability, the worst thing that could happen is that people will die, all right? If it's not being well managed, social sustainability of that is that, well, there's no social sustainability in that perspective, because lives are destroyed, people lose their home, you lose communities, for example, like Grenfell Tower, and you lose social space. Economic sustainability, obviously, if your building burns down, investments and homes are lost. Levels of loss, well, your investment depends on your insurance, okay? And keep in mind that some people forget that they have to take out insurance or do not renew it. I have a friend who had his, I'm not sure if you guys heard of it, Spencer Street. There was a fire not too long ago, I think sometime this year or something. He stayed in the apartment right below the one that went on fire. Fire spread into their apartment, everything was gone, right? And they were owner-occupied, forgot to take out insurance. Everything's gone, right? They lost thousands of dollars just from a fire like that, right? So depending on what level of insurance you have, what cover you have, that will affect your economic sustainability. So that's just advice for yourself. If you do buy a place, make sure you have insurance. Endless number of lawsuits as well, and cost to rebuild is tremendous, okay? Environmental sustainability, obviously there's nothing environmental sustainable about a building burning down, all right? Look at all that, all our environmental waste going into, well, being burned off, okay? So lots of toxic emissions, and putting costs aside, it then require a lot of material to rebuild our entire building. Okay, I know I'm just flying through everything, but that's because we're at 5 o'clock, all right? So the exam, okay? The key thing for you guys is you're accessible on every single topic, okay? Even though I've brought guest lecturers in, you're accessible on those material as well, okay? Which is why attendance for Bruce's lecture was quite important, because if you look at his lecture slides, I don't think you could really put together everything that he was saying. You kind of actually have to be here to see what he's drawing, etc., while he's going through everything, okay? So you're accessible on everything, nothing is exempted. This is how your cover sheet would look like. All right, so ABPL 900275. You have 3 hours to do the exam. You should already know that. 15 minutes reading time. I'll be there for the first half an hour in case you have any questions. I don't think Kusal's going to be there, but I'll be there. And if there's anything wrong with his part, I'll give him a call to clarify. The following calculators are authorized, so make sure you bring in a calculator that is authorized, okay? They will inspect your calculator, and if it's not authorized, it will most probably be removed, okay? A financial calculator is not allowed, only the ones listed here. You're allowed to bring in foreign language dictionaries, and the main thing I wanted to go through in this was this part here, number 7, instruction to students, okay? Your exam is worth 60% of the entire subject. Kusal's part is worth 30 marks, and my part is worth 30 marks. You have to do 6 questions in total, 3 in his part and 3 in my part. The main difference here is that in Kusal's section, section A, you have a choice, all right? You only have to do 3 out of the 4 questions. In my part, you have to answer every single section, all right? The rest you could sort of read by yourself. Oh yeah, there we go. So section A, choose 3 out of 4. My part, answer all 3. And what do I want to say? Format of the questions, right? From my memory, no multiple choice questions. They're mainly short to medium answer length questions, all right? So no particular, there's no essays involved. At most, the marks offered for a question might be 10 marks. But then I will give you the breakdown of, what we expect you to explain for that number of marks, kind of, okay? Any questions about the exam? Yep. For the past exams? No. There's no answer. You will not get the answers for the past exams. They're simply there for you, for your reference. Okay. Oh, right. Dot points for the exam. If I'm just really concerned that some people would just do dot points and then I'm trying to read what you're thinking, but then I can't understand what you're thinking. If you want to do dot points, make sure you go this is the 5 blah blah blah, and then dot point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's fine, okay? But don't go dot point the entire thing to the extent that I don't understand what you're saying, okay? Any other questions?
Is the previous exam paper available in the library?
I believe I've made them available. Look up on the LMS. There should be a past exams link. I just put it up yesterday. There should be 1 file on there, and then there's 2 papers in that file. No? You guys can't see the...
No, it's blank.
Okay. Why don't I just open that up and look straight away? Any other questions while we do that?
Yep, so I just wanted to check if I have a financial calculator that's outside of whatever that's authorized, who do I get to verify?
It's a financial calculator.
Yeah.
Like the one you use in Kimberly's class?
Yeah, mine is not HPA. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's not available. I'll do that right now. If it's a financial calculator, I don't believe you can bring it in.
No, because, only this, based on the cover page that I'm looking at now, right? The HP10BII, right? It's actually a financial calculator.
How complex is that financial calculator?
It's different brand. So,
Is it the one that you use in Kimberly's classes?
no, I actually have it now. Do you want to take a look?
Okay, I'm not an expert at calculators. Don't forget that's not my
precisely. Yeah, but it looks like this. It's just a...
Oh, okay. Oh, it's a Texas Instrument. Ooh, I'll have to check with Kusal. if it was permitted to be similar to those that we have, I believe you have to bring it to some students something, and then they'll give you a sticker saying that it's permitted in the exam. Yeah, so it's quite complex. Yeah, it's best to get it verified before, because the worst case scenario is you show up and then you can't use your calculator for like half of the exam, okay?
If they have spare battery in there, in case I want run.
In case yours runs out, then I'll propose changing your battery before going into the exam, okay? I know it happens, like you do your exam halfway and then you can't really see very well because it's turning grey and running out of battery. But yes, change your batteries then if that's your concern. Any other questions on the exam? Yep.
So this may be not so applicable, but in Kusal's tutorials, he goes through each scenario using Excel, which is fine, but we're not using Excel in the exam, we're using financial calculators. So in terms of the complexity of the questions for 10 marks, whatever it is
How complex is it going to be?
complex to the degree that they are in the tutorial? Because you can do it in 2 seconds if you have Excel, whereas if you've got a financial calculator, it makes it look.
I'll say maybe have a look at the past exams that I've just put up. From my understanding, they'll be of a similar level of difficulty as what's in the past exams. Okay, because I've had a look at his questions. It's the degree of difficulty is the same as the past exams. Okay, so you should definitely be able to do it on your financial calculator. It might be, a reiteration of what you had in your tutorial, but broken down into however many steps, and then you get rewarded based on those steps, etc. Okay, but maybe best to check with him so that you know what he expects in terms of answers for that part of the exam, because he's marking his own part. Okay, yep.
I just did a quick search on getting the approved sticker stock one, right? So actually, the website is actually saying that you're no longer required to get an approval sticker. But instead, the examination invigilator will conduct spot check during examination to ensure the correct calculators are being used. So,
if you could, I'll say maybe borrow the HP or something that you're familiar with, because I don't want to tell you not to do it and then you go there and you can't use your calculator, and at the same time you want a device that you're familiar with using.
yeah, I'll use this device.
Have you been using the Texas Instrument for your entire degree?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe double check with Kusal. Because if anything happens at the exam, they'll give Kusal a call to verify if that's allowed. And then if he says yes, then it's a yes. Sorry, not great answer. Any other questions about the exam? Otherwise, we'll flick over to the assignment. Okay? All right. Okay, so assignment 2, lots of questions, I understand. Individual assignment, I made that error in my email, so sorry about that. Just get so confused with my other subject. All right, so make sure you go back to the learning criteria. This is essentially what we are trying to assess you on, okay? We're not trying to kill you. We just want you to demonstrate these items, all right? We want you to demonstrate, number 1, the principles and techniques of property and asset valuation and analysis. Number 2, we want you to show us that you understand the different characters and roles within the real estate management perspective. So basically, those 4 real estate management perspective, and to illustrate that you understand how it might differ depending on what sort of stakeholders you have or what sort of assets that you have, right? Be aware of social, legal, economic, and environmental impacts of property. So that's kind of covered in what we asked you. Now let's go all the way down to the assignment. All right. So essentially, what we want you to do is we want you to assume that this portfolio that you're advising your client on mainly have 2 assets. All right. Asset number 1 is from assignment 1. Asset number 2 you choose from this list here. Feel free to use anything that's not on that list, all right? But make sure you choose something that's a retail shopping center or an industrial business park, all right? My understanding is that most people would choose a shopping center because you get a lot more information on shopping centers online. You get to walk through that and identify with your eyes who the tenants are. Okay? If it's not on the list, it's fine. My only advice to you is make sure you choose a shopping center that is not too big and nothing that's too small. Okay? Choose something that is doable, and my favorite is normally a neighborhood shopping center. Okay? Because that's where we normally visit. Choose something that's familiar to you, something that you've observed for a long time. Yep.
Neighborhood malls usually sell for half the price of the first asset, which I value to be 100 million. And in the recommended ones, the Berkeley Square is a sub-regional. So I think the difference is that in the neighborhood, you just have Woolworths. In sub-regional, you have Kmart, Woolworths, and like you have...
Right, because Berkeley Square has huge anchor tenants. But at the same time...
The value is similar. Like when I found a different sub-regional mall, the value is similar to $100 million.
Which is what Berkeley Square is sort of worth instead of the others.
So
Yeah, because there are some smaller neighborhood centers. I agree, Berkeley Square is quite big in terms of the tenancy that they have is quite massive. But you know what, at the end of the day, what we're basically trying to assess you on in terms of that is not so much the value, but more of who is in there and how do you manage those people and what they want or need from you, if that makes sense. Yeah, okay. So we're really not so focused on the value of it because this subject's not about valuation, but we're more focused on how do you manage whoever's in that shopping mall. Okay. What else do we have? Next, asset description, okay? Make sure you start off with telling us what your asset is, some description of what it is. I believe, what's the limit on number of words? Was it 1,000? I believe I saw 1,000, right? Okay, so remember you do not have many words to work with. It's 1,000, it's not much words. Yes, right, so,
Really?
I think so.
I already reached the 1,000 for first 2 hours.
I think let's scroll all the way back. I think that's what I saw today. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 1,000.
It's only 1,000, okay? So if you're writing like 5,000 words, you're definitely overthinking everything or you're being too lengthy. Okay, yep, question?
I'm almost finished my assignment, and it's really hard for us to finish that in 1,000 words.
I agree.
Because 7 topics, and then we can't use only 100 words to talk about every.
Okay, the trick is, because I've done the subject myself, use tables, okay? So okay, you mainly use your words for things like, let's say you have a heading, 1.2, right? Asset description. You use your words for the paragraphs that you need to introduce that section, and then because a bulk of the information or what we're asking you to do is compare the 2 different assets side by side. So from my experience of doing it and marking it, the easiest way to handle this word problem is to have one asset on one side, one asset on the other side of the table, and then do the comparison in the table. Okay? Dot points as well. Okay? Make it as clear as possible in the table what you're referring to. So even if, let's say, asset management subsection, you might just say something like, this section deals with asset management. We will be covering outgoings, capital expenditure, repairs, and maintenance in table blah, 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 and blah. And then you might want to use more words to then sort of just summarize the position at the end of that sort of subsection. Right? 1,000 words is very little. Okay?
The table still counts for words.
No, tables doesn't count.
Extremely short.
Sorry?
Once even I put it on the table for the word, it still counts how many words I have.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. What's important is that Kusal's not supposed to